Okay, we're good.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting, stimulating, and informative webcast from the
Hello, Larry Moffat.
from the Washington Times Foundation and from the Universal Peace Federation's International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace sponsoring this one. Today, we're going to be talking about the environmental issues of Northeast Asia, particularly the Korean Peninsula, which has seen conflict of one kind or another for more than a century, since 1905. We'll talk about deforestation, the DMZ, a little bit about the Gobi Desert, and much more. And we will. This is one of a series, and we're going to do several of these because the topic is extremely large, more than we can handle in 1 hour. Our moderator today is Dr. Michael Jenkins, chairman of the Universal Peace Federation, North America, and president of the co-sponsor of this webinar, the Washington Times Foundation. He is also chairman of Washington Times Holdings, the owners of the Washington Times newspaper, current director of Northeast Asia Peace Initiative and the Middle East Peace Initiative, which have worked since the 1980s on conflict resolution prospects on the Pacific Rim and in Israel and Palestine. And that's just not even his day job. Welcome, Dr. Jenkins. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you for your work as the Secretary General of the Universal Peace Federation. We welcome to all, give a welcome to all of our audience throughout America and many other countries that will join in today. Our topic today is to look at the prospects for peace in relationship to North and South Korea, Northeast Asia, and some of the environmental concerns that are also important to address so that our countries can all collaborate together and build a cooperative environment that allows for economic prosperity and security and safety in every way. We have two speakers today that are very distinguished, Dr. Seung-Ho Lee and Dr. Matthew A. Shapiro, and I'll be introducing them. The Universal Peace Federation is a global organization in 185 countries. It's an NGO of the United Nations with general consultative status. And we have active chapters in those 185 nations, and we have 6 associations that we relate with that allows us to look at problems in the world, whether they be environmental or in terms of security or peace or humanitarian needs. We look at them from the view of 6 associations. The first one is dealing with heads of state and first ladies, such as the International Summit Council for Peace. That is a global affiliated association where we've had many presidents and prime ministers, current and former, that help give us insights and dialogue for how we can really develop more cooperation among the nations. This was particularly effective with this pandemic of COVID-19. And we also have the Parliamentarians for Peace, headed by Congressman Dan Burton, and also former Speaker of the Philippine Parliament, Speaker Dee Venecia. And we have a Religious Leaders Association, we have a Business Association, we have a Media Association. And as Larry mentioned, this is co-sponsored by the Washington Times Foundation. And also the Washington Times is a daily newspaper in Washington, D.C., quite popular. And many of the forums that we do are reported on there that go globally and through our digital media property. Today's forum is the International Association of Academicians for Peace, scholars or leaders in the peace field or environmental field that we believe can help make a contribution to building more cooperation and addressing the serious challenges we're facing now within our environment. Our environment is a very, very serious challenge to the world. And many see it as the primal challenge that must be addressed. We also agree that it must be addressed. We want to see it addressed through science and through innovation. And we see that cooperation is needed. We want to try to depoliticize a lot of the things that go on in some of these fields so that we can cooperate together and look for solutions in any way necessary. But we really do want to understand more clearly what is the problem and what are the options to solve that problem. Today, we're focused on North and South Korea, Northeast Asia, China, Japan, and America's involvement there. We are doing a series with UPF with those 6 associations, and we're doing it focused for the next couple months on Korea. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m., we'll be here focusing on how we can bring peace in Northeast Asia through the various professions that people have. Last week, we had a very interesting forum on the business dimensions of North and South Korea with China, the United States, Japan, and Russia all involved. And it was very productive. And we had representatives from all the 6 parties involved in one way or another. Today, we're going to look at the special expertise of 2 of our panelists today. And I'd like to first introduce Dr. Seung-Ho Lee. Dr. Seung-Ho Lee is the president of the DMZ Forum. And he is also the leader of this forum that aims to preserve globally unique biological and cultural resources of the Korean Demilitarized Zone, the DMZ. He wants to create a peace park there. And this is something that UPF is totally behind. We have also been in collaboration with Dr. Lee's group on the Peace Park. We have promoted this before the United Nations. We want it to be seen as a United Nations approved program because we do believe that kind of peaceful engagement, taking care of the environment, beautifying that whole area also changes the culture. It changes the hearts and minds of people. He's been interviewed by all the major media in the United States, Korea, and Japan. He helped plant thousands of tree saplings on many North Korean hills and mountains in very dire conditions. So we welcome at this time our dear friend and scholar, Dr. Seung-Ho Lee. Dr. Lee, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Sorry for my voice conditions. I like the statement in this program flyer that the environment is like children who are ignored in a home where the parents fight. So I think it's about time we should put our children first. So I think the environment should be our first priority for our own survival. So now I'm going to switch to my PPT prepared for this program. Today, I'd like to talk about the desperate need for reforestation in North Korea. One of the most adverse effects of deforestation is the chronic problem of flooding and landslide that leads to the total devastation of rice and crop fields and people's livelihoods. In this regard, the flooding of Anju, North Korea in July 2012 cannot be forgotten. According to the DPRK Red Cross, about 80% of Anju was flooded. More than 20,000 hectares of rice and crop fields were ruined. Nearly 10,000 houses were destroyed, and residents fled to the roof of their houses and buildings. Many urban and rural roads were disconnected. More than half of this deserted bus was submerged. This is the horrible scene of the Anju Public Library. The Anju flooding left thousands of people's livelihoods totally ravaged, with a huge death toll of 88 people. The bigger problem, however, is that this kind of horrendous disaster is not a once-in-a-lifetime incident. In North Korea, almost every year in July and August, thousands of people have been devastated by this flooding. Of course, we can blame more frequent torrential rains caused by climate change for this flooding. But considering nearby countries, such as South Korea and Japan, getting the similar amount of heavy rains, we found that North Korea's death toll and other related damages are much more severe than those of other countries. As you see in this chart, North Korea's death toll caused by flooding in 2016 is 538 people, which is the third place in the worldwide context after Hades. What is the problem in North Korea? As you see, about 80% of the North Korean land is composed of mountains, and the population is over 24 million. North Korea simply does not have enough arable land to produce adequate agricultural production per person. Under this condition, according to Dr. Rakhyun Kim's report for the DMZ Forum, North Korean leaders make a fatal mistake in 1970s, as they also acknowledge now, that they allow farmers to cultivate terrace crop fields on mountain slopes that are less than 15 degrees and located below 500 meters above sea level. This conversion of mountain forest to agricultural fields, along with the increasing use of firewood for fuel and transportation for years, resulted in the massive deforestation of the entire North Korean mountains. Experts who participated in the 2011 UNCCD observed that about 3 million hectares of North Korean forest have been destroyed in the last several decades. On average, 30% of the forest of the entire nation have been devastated. Here, as you see, especially in Pyeongan-namdo, where Anju is located, the deforestation rate is 47%. It is much higher than the national average. That explains why Anju has been severely ravaged by the massive flooding almost every year. But we do have a hope. The DMG Forum, along with other partner organizations, has planted trees in North Korea. We work with officials from the DPRK Ministry of Land and Environmental Protection and other local officials and residents. We bring thousands of tree saplings from China to North Korea by trucks for planting. We also bring tons of tree seeds from South Korea to grow them in the North Korean tree nursery farms. Actually, we found that building more tree nursery farms within North Korea is much more cost-effective than bringing tree saplings from China. The following video clip shows our tree planting work in North Korea. North Korean people are really energetic and willing to work together in tree planting. After several years of tree planting in North Korea, however, we learned that building more tree nursery farms and the tree planting on the hills are only the beginning. We realized that we need to assist them in a more systematic and creative way to get the long-term nationwide result of the reforestation in higher mountains. So we started the nationwide reforestation project of South Korea in the 1970s. Ironically, as I said, in this period, North Korea began to allow local people to cut mountain trees and cultivate mountain slopes for agricultural production. In the 1960s and 70s, the conditions of South Korean mountains were much worse than North Koreans. But after decades of systematic and creative reforestation efforts, South Korea has become one of the most successful examples of reforestation in the world. South Korea emerged as the fourth most forested country after Finland, Japan, and Sweden among OECD member states in terms of the ratio of forest compared to the size of the nation. According to Professor Im Sang-jun at Seoul National University, South Korea began the nationwide reforestation project in 1973. Among others, Professor Im emphasized that the creative erosion control in tree planting was most important in achieving the fast and successful result of reforestation in South Korea. Basically, tree planting in the slopes of mountain is totally different from the tree planting in the fields of low hills. There are three phases in the erosion control efforts. First, we must establish the terrace-style tree planting to solidify the soils in the middle of the mountain slopes. In case of higher slopes, we need people who can plant trees while relying on the ropes, just like the military training in the mountain. The second phase is the fertilizing and watering of the saplings for faster growth under dire soil conditions. So, people put lots of grasses near the saplings to give them necessary natural nutrients. Also, people dig a contour trench to store rains that can be used slowly for tree saplings nearby. This contour trench idea seems to be very creative. The third phase is channeling the water flow in the mountains when it rains heavily. This effort is very important to protect not only tree saplings from falling, but also rivers from overflowing by stopping soils and sands from mountain slopes. The South Korean experience of erosion control work shows a clear path for the successful reforestation of the mountains. You can see the change before and after in a relatively short period of time. Here I'd like to make a note that this erosion work does not require special knowledge or techniques. Also, no special machines or equipment are necessary. We only need people's passion, persistence, cooperation, and creativeness. I think North Korean people are exactly fit for these qualities. I think they can achieve this reforestation work much faster than South Korean people did, although the South Korean case was the fastest and most successful one in the world so far. Now, relative to improving food production as a disincentive to encroaching upon mountain forests, we plan to launch an agri-forestry project in Seopodong-pan, North Korea. That is the huge 15-hectare grassy mountain area. An area for more profitable fruit trees and a huge scale of crop fields are being planned. The area also could be turned into a dreamland, such as the Alpine Meadows in Switzerland, where thousands of sheep and cows are raised for food production. Another project we conducted was a unique eco-agriculture project in Ambyon Plain between Wonsan and Seopodong-pan. We support the local farmers to produce more rice and crops by providing tractors, other farm equipment, and training in organic farming techniques. In return, local farmers and residents protect the Ambyon Plain for the stopover of endangered migratory species such as red-crowned cranes and white-naped cranes coming from the Korean DMZ during the winter. We also request that they leave some crops for birds after harvesting. In so doing, we learn how to build peace between humans and the nature. In addition, we found that the officials and scientists from the DPRK Ministry of Land and Environment Protection are very intelligent and modest. The following video clip captured during our meeting shows their readiness to achieve the national reforestation goals and their willingness to work cooperatively with other international actors for environmental protection in general.
나라에서 이제 이 다른 나라들 우리 국제 기구들과 이제 금융부에서 협조를 기본 이제 1990년대 후반기 이때부터 이제 기본적으로 이제 좀 활성화되는 좀 많이 이제 활발하게 진행됐다고 말할 수 있습니다. 이제 그리고 이제 유엔 사막화 방지 협약인가 하는 활동이 내서 우리나라에서 이제 유엔 사막화 방지 협약에 가입하고 그다음에 이제 유엔 사막화 방지의학 소비국 그리고 이제 비상자금을 조금 받아가지고 이제 우리나라에서 사막화 방지의학 민족 행동 작성했습니다. At the same time, in Pyongyang, there is going on the national workshop for the assessment and rehabilitation of the land management campaign of the last year. During this workshop in Pyongyang, there will be exchange of the experiences, lessons learned for the activities carried out during the last year for the reforestation and river and stream management and protection of the environment. And at the end of the mission, there will be some prize activities for the counties which are good in conducting these activities throughout the country, so that the models should be replicated through other countries of the counties of the country.
Actually, North Korea has been diligent in joining many international environmental agreements and implementing them to meet contracting obligations. The report by Dr. Rakhyung Kim shows the list of DPRK's involvement in the international environmental protection efforts. In this regard, we can pursue a UNESCO biosphere reserve in the region linking Mountain Kumgang in North Korea, the DMZ, and Mountain Sorak in South Korea. This mountain region is especially well preserved in the middle of the Baekdu-daegan, that is a long mountain range covering the entire Korean Peninsula. The following video clip shows the world treasure, a potential UNESCO biosphere reserve. Just as we can build peace between humans and the nature, so can we build peace among humans by greening the conflict. That is, by working together in protecting the nature, people can overcome the conflict and build peace. As we examined, North and South Korean people can work together very intimately in the reforestation process of North Korea. Through the inter-Korean reforestation efforts, one Korean people from two Koreas can overcome the conflict and build peace. The DMZ Forum is a US-based NGO. It has been able to plant tree saplings in North Korea, even when DPRK is under UN economic sanctions, because tree planting is not an item for sanction. Inter-Korean cooperation in the area of mountain reforestation is obviously doable even under the UN economic sanctions. Who would object when passionate and creative people from both Koreas and around the world plant tree saplings and do erosion control works in North Korean mountains? In particular, the most heavily deforested mountains in Pyeongan-namdo, where Anju is located, should be taken care as soon as possible. With people's strong will and desire, these environmental activities in North Korean mountains can be implemented. In concurrence with the vigorous political negotiations on North Korean nuclear weapons and the formal end to the Korean War. Passionate people from both Koreas and around the world can do something doable with true love in reforesting the North Korean mountains in dire conditions and preserving the two pristine mountains in both Koreas. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. That was an excellent, excellent presentation. You know, the founder of the Universal Peace Federation, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, is from Anju, North Korea. And I know she will be deeply comforted when she sees that you are doing such work to prevent the flooding of her hometown. And to see North and South Korean people working together is really the most beautiful thing, because the heart of the Korean people really wants to come together. People do not want war. And these are ways we can help one another and open that door. And thank you very much. We'll have questions after our next presenter, and then we'll have some discussion time. We're very honored to present to you at this time Dr. Matthew A. Shapiro. Dr. Shapiro is Associate Professor of Political Science at Illinois Institute of Technology. He is a research affiliate for the Argonne National Laboratories Joint Center for Energy Storage Research. He has held research fellowships and appointments at the Asiatic Research Institute at Korea University and the East Asia Institute and the Industrial Technology Research Institute and the Electronics Telecommunications Research Institute. We're very honored to present to you Dr. Matthew A. Shapiro, who will take a different look of how nations can cooperate together to improve our environment and to develop energy resources that will take us into the next stage. Matthew, welcome.
Thank you very much. Please let me know if you have any trouble hearing me or.
Very good. You're sounding very good.
Great. Yes, so that was a great presentation. I think what I'll be doing is talking about the larger region with regard to air pollution, environmental problems in Northeast Asia. It's almost springtime in Northeast Asia, which means it's almost time for everyone to start really dealing with the massive air pollution problem. The introduction to this panel mentioned the Gobi Desert, which is, of course, the original source of air pollution, but it was at one time simply dust and sand, fine dust, which would move from the Northeast region down through China and into places like the Korean Peninsula and Japan. But as industrialization has taken off in China, there is a lot more to it. It's not just the dust, but it's actually all of the particulates that attach to the dust, which create huge problems on a health-related scale as well as on an economic scale, because these health-related concerns translate into economic costs. But all of that is sort of a background to a paper, and one that I'll be reviewing with you today, that I wrote for Global Asia approximately a year ago, that addresses a few points that I think are relevant for this attempt to consider how there could be better solutions internationally. So let me first explain the core principle of how things would work. And it's based actually on a North American model. Not to say that North America has answers for Northeast Asia at all, but to say that something positive has come out of these challenges to address air pollution flows, both between the United States and Canada, but also within the United States, which is just a massive geographic area, and where we might have certain state regulations in one place that are very strict and robust. They might be looser in other places. And so as that transboundary air pollution flows, the source of that air pollution, the state that's maybe reaping huge economic returns from that industry or that energy production process, would simply throw their hands up and say, it's not our problem anymore. Something like this is an aversion to adhering to this international principle of economic responsibility. And to use the language of the original agreement between the United States and Canada, it says, under the principles of international law, as well as the law of the United States, no state has the right to use or permit the use of its territory in such a manner as to cause injury by fumes in or to the territory of another or the properties of persons therein. So all that really means is if there's any transboundary air pollution, whether it's within the United States from state to state or from the United States to Canada or from Canada to the United States, you're responsible. You're responsible for the production of that pollution. Everything all right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a standard, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything has been adhered to. It doesn't necessarily mean that the regulation of that has allowed there to be it doesn't mean that there has been a sufficient meeting of that standard. And it also fails to address the fact that there may be asymmetries in pollution flows. In the North American case, there was sort of a tit for tat where, Canada had some pollution that flowed into Montana, and in the Northeast, there was some pollution that flowed from the industrial corridor around Detroit into places like Toronto, and blew northward from there, very far northward. I think they found it in the Arctic regions of Canada, in fact, some pollution. In Northeast Asia, there are many more asymmetries in terms of air pollution flows. Most atmospheric scientists conclude that as little as 40% and as much as 70% of Korea's and Japan's air pollution originates in China. So this means that we have a lot of potential finger pointing going on from the Korean Peninsula residents to China, and from Japan to China, and from Japan to South Korea, for that matter. And it's also worth noting that the can has been effectively kicked down the road in some ways, as the pollution has now landed in places like Southeast Asia, which are pointing their fingers northward to the Korean Peninsula. So these differences are important, and they're also, it's important to note that the asymmetries that exist are not constant. It happens on an ebb and flow cycle, which is something that I've covered in other research I've done, where we can look at the amount of attention that's given to the issue, especially in the winter months where it's particularly severe in places like China, in places like South Korea, the transboundary air pollution. And again, as I said earlier, in the springtime when the yellow dust kicks up. So what's happened? I focus a lot on South Korea and how the South Korean public has responded, and in terms not just of their lifestyle changes, but also in terms of their beliefs about the nature of the problem. Lots of focus on the weather, lots of understanding of the science, lots of purchasing of indoor air purifiers. In my research, I found that from 2017 to 2019, the average Seoul resident, about 25% of those Seoul residents would have an indoor air purifier. That had doubled to about 50% in just a couple of years in 2019. And a lot of opting to stay indoors for as much as 4 weeks each year. I think it's also interesting to note that these kinds of impacts are perhaps part of this is off topic, but it's perhaps part of the reason why South Korea has been so adept at dealing with the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, not just because they stay indoors for 4 weeks a year. The pandemic's gone on for a year. It's because of the mask wearing, which really puzzles a lot of Western leaders in terms of why we in the United States are averse to wearing masks. I'm speaking at a general level. So one would expect the transboundary air pollution problem to be resolved if we establish that 40 to 70% attribution to China. But this hasn't always been the case. Atmospheric scientists are using simulation modeling to trace the proportions of acid rain deposition to its source, usually in China. This is known as source-receptor relations. And these studies have been coupled with additional concerns about the uncertainty of complex atmospheric processes. What I'm basically saying is that the science of source receptor relations could possibly be politicized, not necessarily by the scientists. And a recent paper that's that will be forthcoming and has been accepted at Environmental Science and Policy is going to do is basically a meta-analysis of all research that addresses source receptor relations in Northeast Asia. And we don't find nearly any sort of politicization among scientists, although there does tend to be a country-to-country difference in what sort of focus is made on whether the pollution, whether the researchers are based in China, Korea, or Japan. I could talk more about that in the Q&A if anyone is interested. In terms of what has gone on to address this at an international level, the diplomacy that's needed to address the air pollution problem, we see a lot of positive efforts, but nothing deeply impactful yet. So I remain optimistic, but where it all starts is with the institutions of the Asia Development Bank, the UN Environment Program, the Northeast Asian Conference on Environmental Cooperation, all providing a context, a framework, an institutional framework for the countries in Northeast Asia to coordinate and also to draw in the other countries in East Asia. It shouldn't simply be China, Japan, and Korea. Since 1998, for example, the East Asian Acid Deposition Monitoring Network has been focusing on acid rain in the region. And since 1999, each year, the ministers from the three countries' respective environmental ministries, by the way, when I say Korea, I'm referring to South Korea in this, they get together to talk about environmental problems. And transboundary air pollution has always been on their radar, which is, again, important, but not necessarily the only factor that needs to occur. So what does need to occur? How can change occur? Has there been any change? We did see in China, for example, a 2018 three-year action plan that was implemented to address air pollution problems. Mostly this was domestically generated. The local residents, the local policymakers finally realized that action needed to be done. And some of the industrial processes that had been previously based in Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei were spread out from that region, which actually led to emissions reductions in the Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei region. Yet that corresponded with a nearly 1-to-1 increase in air pollution in those regions that were farther out in the northwest and south of that region, which doesn't sound like a viable long-term solution. It does help the residents of the Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei region, of course. I also want to note that if that sort of practice is employed, wherever it's employed, it only avoids an attempt to comply with any sort of principle of external responsibility. The idea that, as I stated at the beginning, individual countries or regions or any sort of geography is going to be responsible for the pollution that it generates. So a lot of self-reflection is needed. The countries in the region have to continue to meet. They have to continue to do what they do to address the change that is needed, like in South Korea, coal-fired power generation being reduced, or a shift away from diesel vehicles while an embrace of electric vehicles. There has to be a rebooting of diplomacy. This would help promote any sort of barriers that exist in terms of negotiations between China and South Korea and Japan. There's also something significant that shows that South Korea is not just going to point the finger at China. And I say South Korea and not Japan because it is typically South Korea that is pointing the finger at China to make some demand about responding to external responsibility, adhering for China to adhere to external responsibility. And so in 2019, South Korea appointed former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon as head of the National Council on Climate and Air Quality. to negotiate with Chinese officials. This is an important development, and it actually supersedes the tripartite environment ministries meeting that I mentioned earlier. The science has to be improved too. And we saw some of this occur in certain efforts in 2016, where there was an attempt to measure the amount of air pollution in an extremely effective way, not through necessarily simulations. The United States, NASA actually coordinated with South Korea to do this. And the numbers showed that South Korean air pollution was much higher than expected, but this was not an annual measure. It was a single 4 week or 6 week period during which that data was collected. And I guess I want to finalize this talk by pointing out that perhaps it doesn't need to be state-to-state discussions between Seoul and Beijing, between Tokyo and Seoul and Beijing. It could be between a region in China that is in discussions with perhaps Seoul or Tokyo. And this would allow the problem to be more effectively addressed. If the air pollution is just being moved out of the Beijing region west, but it still blows into South Korea at a relatively steady level over time, if things are unchanged, then perhaps it's time for South Korean governments or the government of South Korea to reach out to a particular region, a provincial leader, and to address this problem. Of course, the socioeconomic benefits have to be emphasized, especially the health-related benefits. Okay, thank you for the opportunity to share this.
Dr. Shapiro, we're honored to have you. It's just an excellent presentation. There's many questions that have come in from our audience. So the first question for Dr. Shapiro, and I'd like to ask Dr. Lee to come back too, if our technical director, Mr. Rapata, could bring Dr. Lee in. Very good. So first, Dr. Shapiro, what collaboration or cooperation has been done between Korea, South Korea, and China, and North Korea and China on this deforestation issue related with the Gobi Desert? Has been cited as one of the sources of pollutants coming across over Korea. I myself have been to Korea 70 times, and I was so shocked in the last few years that I couldn't see the Seoul Tower from the highway anymore on several trips on a sunny day. So what collaboration has been done between South Korea and China, North Korea and China on the pollution cooperation? And any ideas on that you could share? And then we come to Dr. Lee with the next question.
Sure. That's a great question. There was an initial effort to engage in tree planting in the areas surrounding the Gobi Desert. This, based on my understanding of this effort, it wasn't as effective as it could have been. The intention was there, but again, just based on my understanding of the results, the trees were planted in areas that were more cosmetic than impactful. I also, while I don't have definitive evidence of this, I think that the scale has to be massive, and to truly address the catching and the filtering out of the air pollution problem, it is one solution that could be employed in conjunction with other ones, but it certainly can't be the only one.
Thank you. Dr. Lee, what has South Korea, the Republic of Korea, or the DPRK done together with your efforts in tree planting in North Korea? Have they been supportive? And if so, what kind of support did you receive from North Korea and the Republic of Korea, South Korea?
Actually, DMZ Forum is a US-based NGO, and we are only privately supported, private donors in the US only. We didn't get any support from South Korean government, but we are interacting with North Korean government in terms of access to their facility and to the mountains and some scientific help. So financial help is only coming from US private donors. And in between North Korean and DMZ Forum, we're helping each other to get the North Korean mountains forested.
Today's program is jointly sponsored by our Canadian UPF and the USA UPF. And one question came in from one of our Canadian delegates. How can a Canadian citizen go with you to participate in the reforestation in North Korea? Is it possible that they can come into North Korea to join your efforts?
Yes, Canadians are actually free to go now, but US citizens cannot go to North Korea yet because of President Trump blocked it, the trip to North Korea. So when the US lifted, travel sanctions to North Korea, Canadian people obviously can join us to make, for reforestation efforts in North Korea.
Thank you very much. Dr. Shapiro, what percentage of the pollutants coming across to Korea from China or from other parts of Northeast Asia are from factories and gas emissions from cars and so forth, as opposed to the dust and the other pollutants from the deforestation? What percentage of that pollution that has been identified in Japan and Korea is from carbon-based pollutants or others?
The number that I use is a range because the estimates that are generated is a range. The expert research, the experts that have done research on this using atmospheric science and simulations has gone from as low as 40% from China, landing in South Korea and elsewhere east in Japan, to as high as 70%. This is an annual average. It is not an average that is limited to the last visit you had, Dr. Jenkins, when you couldn't see Seoul Tower, but it is, which might have been much higher. So it really depends on the time of year and all of those different factors. But when you ask an atmospheric scientist, I expect you would get an answer of somewhere in the 40 to 70% range.
Thank you. What about, Dr. Lee, deforestation is based on the use of wood and the need for wood. How do you combat the deforestation without addressing the use of wood as a low-cost household fuel for household heating and cooking?
Yeah, actually, that is the biggest problem. Food production and the reforestation is competitive. So that's why we're doing some agroforestry projects in Seopodungpan, North Korea. It's a 15-hectare grassy land where, thousands of sheep and cows can be raised so that rather than crops and rice, North Korean people can get alternative food sources. So we should do that together along with reforestation. Another problem is the firewood. Fuel consumption by firewood need to be reduced so that matter also should be handled.
Thank you. Dr. Shapiro, we're really grateful for your presentation, you and Dr. Lee both, but you are presenting your facts and statistics in a very excellent way. I don't feel there's a political agenda here to take a strong opinion on the simple solution to all this, because sometimes people think there's a very simple solution, but actually it's not simple, especially when we come to China and asking them to reduce emissions, and also North Korea and South Korea. It's not a simple solution. What do you think about that? What is your view of even the global situation of reducing the problem of our pollution in the world? What is the number one cause of that problem? Is it anthropogenic, human generated is the number one thing, or is it the, what's your views on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I also appreciate the observation that I've tried to remain as unbiased as possible through this, because it's easy to get on the finger pointing bandwagon. This is where my research originated. It was simply at looking at sentiment in the newspapers that reported on this problem in South Korea, where it just skyrocketed in terms of attributing the air pollution problem to China, especially during the high pollution periods. The yeah, it is. It's a commons problem. It's a collective action problem. These are the core and most important problems that we're facing today. And it's important that I don't think this is isolated. The lessons that are learned from what happens in Northeast Asia are the same lessons that can be applied to any sort of international commons problem, collective action problem. In that climate change, for example, could be addressed, coordinated efforts across countries to address climate change. So, you know, on the one hand, it is about identifying the problem, making sure that the science is not politicized, making sure that all of the information is being shared, that this isn't simply a matter of cherry picking science, you know, focusing on the most recent study and ignoring the consensus view, which is what we should all subscribe to. That's the first place to start. The next would be having negotiators like Ban Ki-moon and others that realize we can't just look to China, and I'm speaking about the Korean case in this matter. We can't just look to China to fix the problem. There are certain matters at home that need to be addressed, and the Moon administration, I think, knows this inherently by trying to clean up its own air before the next measurements are taken. So one, the air is in fact cleaner, and two, when that finger pointing is done, it's done with even more confidence and accuracy, because the questions about, you know, Korea not cleaning up its air first before pointing the finger at China would be somewhat addressed. Have I made that clear? I hope so.
Very good. Little different topic, Dr. Lee. The DMZ has a very big problem of being the, you know, completely covered with landmines from the Korean War. Has the number been reduced greatly, or is it kind of steady where it's been? Is there ongoing cooperation to completely demine that whole area?
There are reportedly about 2 million landmines in the DMZ, and only part of it is excavated for the war remains. When the soldiers dig up some part of war remains, and they got the road to the DMZ, but other than that, all the landmines are still there. And it's a very challenging work, how to deal with landmines, because we should not destroy the nature while doing the landmine demining work. So we develop some scientific and engineering kind of creative scheme to remove landmines in DMZ, or we're thinking about leave some region just as it is. So we need to talk about that more.
Very good. Former Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, has really been doing some great work worldwide for the environment and also for peace. And he's been working also with the Universal Peace Federation. So we would like to collaborate with both of you on these important areas. We also have another sister organization called HJ-IFAS. It's the Hyojong International Foundation for the Unity of Sciences. And it's approaching the environmental challenges in depth with science and finding many more possibilities. And we need to listen to all the scientists and really come together and find that consensus. And the more we can keep the politics, out of the central decision on which science we're going to choose, it's better that we work together to really identify the problems and find the solutions. Not simple. So we really need to listen to everybody to understand more. But at the same time, I think that the leadership of Secretary General Bond and also the work that you're both doing and so many organizations is so important. So Dr. Shapiro, have you been to North Korea yet, or have you had any collaboration with China? And in some of your studies, have you worked with some of the Chinese scientists, and have they been at Argonne with you, or?
No, I haven't. Well, first of all, I haven't been to North Korea. I definitely want to help out with the tree planting there, Dr. Lee. So please let me know when I can. That looked amazing. In terms of working with Chinese researchers, I think that's fundamental to the problem. And I am working with Chinese researchers at Chinese University of Hong Kong and Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Japanese researcher there. So these collaborations are important, but it is a challenge. I should also point out there are some serious constraints in the United States now about coordinating with Chinese researchers because of some of the some of these security issues, and that's just tragic. But hopefully we'll get through this.
We'll get through it. We'll get through it. But we need to dialogue and continue to work together. Dr. Lee, I think one more thing. How's your work with the United States? As President Biden, have you had a chance to promote this forestation effort with the Trump administration, or have you begun to communicate with the Biden administration? We believe that the White House should know about this and support this.
Yes, not yet, but we are trying to approach within the weeks. Well, so now political things are really complicated, but it will subside soon. So we are preparing to approach them in that regard.
Thank you very much. Well, I know I'm connected with the Washington Times, and I know they'll be very interested to hear your views, and perhaps you can write an op-ed in the future to discuss these issues of both of your expertise. I really appreciate this. I'd like to just have one moment of final comment from Dr. Shapiro and then Dr. Lee, and then we'll draw this to a close. I want to thank our audience for the amazing support you've given us. Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Shapiro, final comment.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I think it's important to understand the complex nature of transboundary air pollution in Northeast Asia, and for the potential, understanding that and the potential it offers for other sorts of transboundary pollution problems.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Shapiro. And Dr. Lee?
Thank you. And again, sorry for my voice condition. And again, I think environment should be our first priority for our survival. But it seems not easy. But science for environment, economy for environment, and even politics for environment, I think we can green the conflict among humans by doing that.
I agree. We fully agree.
The Anju area should be reforested as soon as possible.
Yes, very good. We will support that. Also, I really am happy. Wendy Stovall is one of our executive directors of the UPF in Utah, and she just sent a note in to thank you and also say Heidi Kuhn is the founder of Mines to Vines. She's been doing great work in this area, removing vines and redeveloping the nature in Vietnam. Roots of Peace is the name of her organization. I'm sorry we don't have time for more dialogue and questions. I think we'll have to invite you both back very soon for another forum. Also, everybody, I think Dr. Lee's website is on our chat for the Peace Forum. And also you can find Dr. Shapiro, if you Google Dr. Shapiro in the Illinois Institute of Technology, you'll find him there, and he's published some great papers on this topic. It's very uplifting and very hopeful. We do believe we can manage our environment properly and also improve our human relations, and all of it should come together the same way. On behalf of our founder, Dr. Ha-Chan Moon, I want to thank you all. And on behalf of the UPF, Dr. Walsh is our chairman internationally. I'm the president, and also the Washington Times. Mr. Tom McDivitt is our chairman. He's totally in support here. And we thank you sincerely, and thank you to our audience. We'll sign off now, and we'll see you next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Our next Peace Forum is going to be with parliamentarians and members of Congress and intelligence officials. So thank you very much. May God bless you all.